talked about commitment, kind of kicked this off, and we talked, I felt like we kind of landed on this place of, just what is kind of our motivation for commitment. We talked about to understand what something is, you have to first understand what it's not. So we walked through some of those things, and so this week I wanted to start out with just something that really it has everything to do with everything I do with university students, because that's primarily what I work with. So, and one of the things that I always say is the most important thing about you is what you think about when you think about God. We're coming in this kind of day and age when, to be really honest with you, we have to define the terms, because no longer can we look at someone and assume that they understand what we mean when we say God. You know, and so the thing I kick off with college students all the time is the most important thing about you is what you think about God. And so when we talk about that, if you think that God is distant, you'll live your life in such a way that God is distant or he's hands off. It's a deistic approach to much of life. And so if you think, and much of our understanding of God is based on our understanding of our earthly fathers. And so if your earthly father was absent, more than likely God is absent in your mind. And so we start to really just kind of see some things shift when we start to really define who God is. And so some of us come in with kind of a concept of who he is, and then we actually start diving into groups like this, or we start diving into his word, or start engaging him in prayer, and then we come out the other side and we see that he's actually different than what we kind of came in understanding. And so when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, we take this word truth. The word truth there is actually meaning this kind of ultimate reality. Like, I am the ultimate reality. Colossians will say it this way, that Jesus Christ is the ultimate reality. Everything else is a shadow of what is to come. And so Jesus is the reality. And sometimes we make out God, we take that word truth, and we just act like it's the facts on a spreadsheet. Or it's a list of kind of propositional statements that we check off on. And that's not who Christ is. And so I'll give you an example. If you've ever had a concept of, that you may have perceived that this is someone that it's not, that it turns out that person is actually different than what you thought. I had a couple roommates, Daniel Dabney. How many of you know Daniel Dabney? Leads worship here, one of my best friends, and years ago we had an apartment together. Me, Daniel Dabney, a guy Brad McNahan, and a guy Reggie Ball. We did not get back our security deposit. I will promise you that. So we're in this apartment. The way our apartment was laid out is you walk into the apartment, and there was like this shotgun kind of hallway that goes to the very back, and that was one of the bedrooms. And so I was in the bedroom, and I'm studying for a message or something, and I hear somebody knock on the door. Well, if you know Daniel's not that tall of a dude, okay? So he's kind of on his tiptoes looking through the people. Brad was gone. It was just Daniel and I there. And so Brad was getting married. They went out looking for a house, and he turns around and he said, dude, it's Brad. And he's like, as soon as I open this door, you jump out and you just scare Brad, because his hands are full of bags. And I said, dude, I'm down. Like, I got in like 3-point stance. And so he said, on the count of 3, and the way you would open the door, and so this person can kind of hide behind the door. And he said, on the count of 3, you just jump out. He goes, 1, 2, 3, and I jump out. Whoa! And it was the UPS man. He stepped back. I won't repeat what he said. But he steps back and he is like, dang, bro, all I need you to do is sign this. And I'm like, bro, I just woke up. I don't know what's going on. Daniel's over in fetal position. The guy can't see him. He's literally in fetal position, and he just is laughing hysterically. He's like, it actually happened. Like, it went through to fruition. He's like, And so but we do that all the time. We end up opening the door, and we're like, whoa, you are different than what I thought. And so the thing that I said last week is our commitments in everyday life. And I know this is about kind of sex, love, and dating. And so, but our commitments in everyday life, especially to the other, whoever the other is, and for some of you it may be a spouse, for some of you that are single, it's whoever the other is, whether it be a coworker, a friend, someone you're dating, whatever that is. Our commitment to God has everything to do with those commitments, or vice versa. Those commitments have everything to do with our commitment to God. And there's a lot of folks that are trying to navigate through what a commitment is without first understanding what does a commitment to God really look like. And so last week I had shared, that was the very thing that we were going to kind of land on this week. If God is nothing more than the facts on a spreadsheet, if He's nothing more than the facts on a spreadsheet, you're going to find out that God is actually drastically different. When I asked my wife to marry me, her father came over to the house, and they don't have a great relationship. Okay, I shared a lot of my wife's story last week. But I'm doing this. I have respect for her family, and so he comes over, and I said, hey, here's the thing. I just cut straight to it. I'm not here for conversation. I'm like, I love you, but I said, I want to marry your daughter. And I remember, I'll never forget it. He looked at me, and he said, are you sure about that? He said, she has an attitude. I'm like, I don't know if I want to punch in your throat or if I just want to, I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, she does. I've seen it, But I'm like, not what I expected. And so she has an attitude. And I go, or the problem isn't whether we're committed or not. The problem is what we're actually committed to. And so when you talk about God, we're gonna open up, of all books, we're gonna look at Job. We talk about Job as being the sufferer, and oftentimes I'm sure you've heard sermons preached, but we've never studied Job as a man, and in this case as a father. And what you really do see is you see Job kind of answering that question of who is God, and you see things radically shift for Job, especially as a father, but as a man. And so we're going to look at Job. I want you to turn to Job chapter 38. Job chapter 38, and we're going to look at verse 3. Job chapter 38, verse 3. Job has just, and Job is this really wild narrative of just, you don't really know if Job or if God is really on the stand. It's like, who's the prosecuting attorney here? Because we also have this one that we know to be the Satan or the adversary, and we're going to look at that in Job chapter 1. But what we see is God on the stand or is Job? Well, at this point, Job has put God on the stand. And God finally responds to Job, and this is his response in verse 3. It says, dress for action like a man. I will question you, or I will interrogate you. This is what some translations say. And you make it known to me. Basically what he's saying is, the actual translation there is, gird up your loins, young man. Because you have no idea what it is that you're talking about. Now, I could give you a message translation of what that actually means. But I think you can get it for yourself. It's like my wife said, why don't you just say grow a pair? And I said, I don't know, but I just said it. And so that's what he's looking at. And so he looks at Job and he says, dress for action like a man. Gird up your loins like a man, because I'm about to interrogate you. And I don't know about you, but if you've seen Zero Dark 30, you see that interrogation scene. It's pretty brutal. I don't think this scene is like that, but there's one quote that comes out of that interrogation scene. The interrogator walks back, he's talking to the female, and he said, the fact of the matter is he will break. It's biological, it's not psychological. And at some point, Job will break. He's going to break. It's a biological thing. It's just a matter of how will he break. And so he's at this place. He's experienced intense suffering. If you turn to Job 1, I want to learn a little bit about Job as a father. Notice Job 1, verse 5. By the way, I studied this about a year ago, and so this has kind of been marinating for some time. And so finally it gets to kind of make its way out. But I've never heard really anybody teach on this. I've been reading some of this, but this was honestly very transforming for me. Verse 5, notice what it says. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them being his kids. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said this, notice what he says. It may be, some of your translations say, it may be possible that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. Now you read that and you're like, okay, what's the point? The fact of the matter is, what do you hear as being kind of the motivation for Job? Fear. At the most extreme. It's reverent to have a fear of the Lord, of understanding God is big, I am small. I get that. But this is a fear of, I don't want to tick you off. So if my kids have possibly sinned, I'm going to consecrate them and I'm going to do this daily. God doesn't order that. And so Job as a father is this very careful, is this very scared, is oftentimes motivated by guilt and shame. And so he's trying to cover the sins of his kids because his mindset is this. This is what we know about Job. He was a man of integrity. I mean, he was a man of moral decency. And so in Job's mind was this. If I'm morally decent, if my kids are covered, nothing bad will ever happen. That is my understanding of who God is. And so notice what the Satan says in this point. So you have this like heavenly judicial council. Okay? The Satan or the adversary comes up. He is the prosecuting attorney in this case. And Job is kind of on the stand, but Job doesn't know it. And the Satan actually says this to God. He says, Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for no reason? Some translations say, hey, you've actually placed a fence around Job, so no wonder he blesses you. But you remove the fence, and I promise you this, what you're going to discover at the end of the day is Job doesn't love you. Job is motivated by guilt and shame, God. So why don't you let me have a day with him? And God responds and he says, okay, here's the deal, you can't touch it. And so Job's family gets taken. If you remember his wife, and I wish we had more time, but his wife says, out of your integrity, you better believe it that you can question God. And so we walk through, and so Job feels this, and he doesn't know this yet, but his understanding of God is about to radically shift. Tragedy does that kind of thing. I remember when our first pregnancy, my wife and I had an appointment. It was on a Thursday. I'll never forget it. We did what boring married couples do. We go to the appointment, then we hit up Barnes & Noble because I didn't want to go to Bed Bath & Beyond. So we go home. And so my wife falls asleep. Normal appointment. Next morning, 6 a.m., I wake up to my wife screaming in the bathroom. She's only 31 weeks. Her water had partially broke. We rush her to the hospital. We get to the hospital. The doctors are preparing us for everything. They say, hey, everything really looks okay. Your son will